Hey class, I hope you're having a great Friday. Today I'm going to introduce a concept called completing the square. It deals with quadratic equations. There are three ways to solve quadratic equations. And remember, quadratic equations are ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Don't forget that a right there. Okay, the first way to solve quadratic equations, which we've been doing, is solve by factoring. We've been doing this for several weeks now. Second, and the one that we're going to be focusing on today, is completing the square. Hopefully you're writing this down. And third is using the quadratic formula, which we will get to in the next couple of weeks. Those are our three ways. Now, the first thing that we're going to talk about is solving quadratic equations that are perfect squares. And remember, perfect squares means that we can take the perfect square root. Ooh, sorry. Let's erase that real quick. Perfect squares. Okay. Now, let me explain to you, you might want to put quotation marks around that because we're going to come back to it. For example number 1, okay, we have x squared minus 10x plus 25 equals 9. Now, I'm going to focus on, give you a chance to copy that down. I'm going to focus on this part of that equation. And with that, you can tell that that is a perfect square. That means there is one number that'll multiply together that'll give us 25. But when we add them, we get negative 10. And we know that it's negative 5. So I can rewrite this equation, or that trinomial, sorry, not equation, x minus 5 squared equals 9. Now go ahead and put that down on your paper. Notice all I did was I rewrote it. Okay? Now, our goal is to solve for x. So that means we got to get x by itself. So to undo a square, we have to do what? That's right, take the square root. So I'm going to take the square root of this side. That means I have to take the square root of this side as well, because whatever you do to one, you have to do the other. So that gives me x minus 5 equals. Now, when we take the square root of 9, there are two numbers that'll multiply together that'll give us 9. And it's positive 3 and negative 3. And we have to include both of those because 3 times 3 is 9, negative 3 times negative 3 is 9. And you have to include both of them. Now, I'm still solving for x, so x is equal to positive 5 plus or minus 3. Now, I'll show you this only one time, and after that, I won't show this step. This is really 5 plus 3, which gives me 8, and 5 minus 3, which gives me 2. So my answer for x is 8 and 2. And that's my answer. Those are my two x's. All right, let's move on to the next one. Okay, example number 2. I'm still working on factoring perfect squares. I have x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 64. Okay, there's my problem. And I'm looking at this trinomial to see if it's a perfect square. And it is, because I have one number that'll multiply by itself, that'll give me 9, but when I add it together by itself, it'll get 6, and that is 3. So I'm going to rewrite it as x plus 3 squared equals, I'm sorry, my stylus is messing up, equals 64. Okay? All I did was rewrite that. Now, to get rid of the square, we have to take the square root. So I take the square root of both sides. That's going to give me x plus 3 equals plus or minus 8. So x is equal to negative 3 plus or minus 8. So x is equal to 5 and negative 11. And that's my answer for example 2. Okay, example 3. I have x squared plus 24x plus 144 equals 5. Now I'm looking at that trinomial, and it is a perfect square, and it'll be x plus 12 squared equals 5. Now, from here, I'm going to do the same thing. I got to get rid of that squared. So I'm going to take the square roots of both sides. So that's going to give me x plus 12 equals plus or minus. Now I can't take the square root of 5, and so it's just simplified. Now, if I need to simplify that's in the square root, then yes, I will simplify it. So x is equal, because I'm still solving for x, negative 12 plus or minus the square root of 5. And these are not like terms, so this is as far as I can go, and that's my answer. Now, we're going to get on to trinomials that do not have a perfect square. So let's start over with example number 1. I have x squared minus 14x minus 8 equals 0. Now, this is going to require several steps, so you'll need to write these steps down. Okay, if you notice, looking at this trinomial, it's not a perfect square trinomial, if that makes sense. That there's not a number that'll multiply by itself, that'll give me 8, and then add it by itself, and I get 14. So therefore, we're going to have to do the steps for completing the square. Step number 1, I'm going to bring c, which is negative 8, to the other side of the equation. So I have x squared minus 14x equals 8. Notice I'm leaving a gap right here. Notice I'm leaving a gap right there because I'm going to put something in its place. Now, from here, okay, you need to listen very carefully. I'm going to take half my middle term, which is half of negative 14. So over here in my think box, I'm going to have a little think box over here. Half of negative 14 is negative 7. And then I'm going to square negative 7 because I need my trinomial to be a perfect square. So I'm making it a perfect square. So that's going to allow me to add positive 49 to that side. And remember, whatever you do to one side, we have to do the other. So I have to add 49 to both sides. Now I have a trinomial that is a perfect square, and that's what I needed, because from here I can go ahead and write x minus 7 squared equals, I still have to add 8 and 49, and I get 57. Now, we do what we did from the previous examples. We take the square root, so x minus 7 comes out, equals plus or minus the square root of 57. So x is equal to 7 plus or minus the square root of 57, which I cannot simplify, and I'm done. Okay, let's do another one. Example number 2. Okay, I have x squared minus 10x plus 19 equals 0. Okay, it's not a perfect square trinomial, so my first step is to move 19 to the other side. So I have x squared minus 10x equals negative 19. Now, remember, our goal is to write this trinomial as a perfect square trinomial. So in my think box over here, I'm going to take half of the middle term, which is negative 10, which is negative 5, and then I'm going to square it, which will give me 25, negative 5 squared. So I've got to add 25 to both sides. So now I have a perfect trinomial square. So I have x minus 5 squared equals negative 19 plus 25 is 6. I take the square root. I take the square root. That gives me x minus 5 equals plus or minus the square root of 6. So x is equal to 5 plus or minus the square root of 6. And that is my answer for example 2.